Hi, I'm Chloe. I'm 22, and my life has been a roller coaster of feeling invisible, overlooked, and constantly fighting to feel valued in my own family. Growing up, I was always the second priority. My younger half sister Emma was always the shining star. I didn't realize it as a child, but now I see how everything that happened shaped me. This is the story of how I lost everything and somehow found my way back to myself, how I lost two families and ended up with just me. I was 4 years old when my mom passed away from cancer. It's still so vivid even now, years later. I remember the smell of her lavender perfume, the way she held me in her arms. It felt like she was my whole world, and then she was gone. After that, everything felt off. I stayed at my grandparents' house for the first year, mostly living in a haze of confusion and sadness. My dad, John, was busy with funeral arrangements and mourning in his own way. I don't blame him for it, but looking back, I know he wasn't there for me in the way I needed him to be. When I was 5, Dad introduced me to Linda. I didn't understand what it meant at first, but I knew it was a big deal. Dad said, "This is Linda, and she's going to be your new mom," as if I would just accept it. She wasn't mean to me, but it felt like she wasn't my mom. She was just another adult figure in my life, trying to take the place of someone who was irreplaceable. What struck me was how quickly Dad moved on. He didn't even give me the time to process losing my mom before he introduced a new woman into my life, one who was pregnant with my half-sister. At the time, I was too young to understand the complexities of it all, but I knew I wasn't the priority anymore. Soon after, Emma was born, and that was when everything truly changed. Suddenly, it wasn't about me anymore. I remember my dad's face when he first introduced me to Emma, so full of pride, like I had never seen him before. It wasn't just the newborn joy. He was proud of his new family, proud of his second chance, proud of his new perfect life with Linda. I was suddenly pushed to the side. All the focus was on Emma. There were new rules in the house, and they all revolved around her. I was supposed to be the big sister, but that meant learning how to be quiet, how to not disrupt things, and how to make room for Emma's needs. I remember my dad telling me to be good or help out with Emma, and I tried. I really did. But it felt like the more I did, the less I mattered. When Emma was old enough to start walking, I thought maybe things would change. Maybe we would be close sisters, best friends even. I imagined that once Emma was old enough to talk, we could have fun and do sister things together. But that's not how it went. As soon as she could speak, she started taking things from me, my books, my toys, even my clothes. Nothing was off limits. And when I would try to stand up for myself, I'd be told to let her have it or don't be selfish. Emma would always get what she wanted, and when I protested, I was labeled the problem child. It wasn't just about possessions. It was about everything. Every little thing in my life, from the way I was treated to the things I loved, was constantly overshadowed by Emma. When I went to Dad to talk about it, to explain how I felt, his response was always the same. "Emma's just a sweet girl, Chloe. Can't you just be a little more patient?" Or, "Why can't you just be like Emma?" It felt like I was invisible, like no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make Dad see me anymore. I remember overhearing a conversation between Dad and Linda once. They were talking about me, about how much money I had in my college fund, and how that money could be better spent on Emma's private schooling. I was shocked. I didn't know how to process that. They were talking about my future, my life, as if it didn't matter. They were prioritizing Emma's needs over mine, and it was clear that I was no longer part of the picture. This wasn't about love or family anymore. This was about Emma fitting into their perfect family, their perfect life. And then there was the constant comparison. Every time Emma did something, even the smallest thing, Dad would make a big deal out of it. "Look at Emma, she's already so smart," he would say while I was quietly doing well in school, winning awards, and trying to find my place. But it was never enough. Emma was the one who mattered now, and I was just there. As I grew older, I became more resentful, but I couldn't leave. I was stuck in this house, this family that never felt like mine anymore. I had to stay and endure, hoping that one day, maybe, someone would finally notice me. But it wasn't until later, when I was about to graduate, that things really started to unravel. The tension had been building, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had put my dreams on hold for so long, living in the shadow of Emma's existence. But now it was my time, or so I thought. It turned out that my father had already made plans for Emma's future, and my place in the family was about to be thrown away. As the years passed, I tried my best to stay out of the way. I wasn't the problem child, but I wasn't the perfect one either. I fell somewhere in between, doing the right things, staying quiet, and hoping that somehow Dad would start to see me again. I thought that maybe if I stayed out of trouble, helped around the house, and worked hard in school, I'd finally earn my place back in the family. I guess I was wrong. When I graduated high school, I knew that my life had to change. I had big dreams of going to college, of finally getting out of the suffocating environment I had spent most of my life in. I wanted to be something more than just the background character in Emma's perfect life. But just as quickly as those dreams began to take shape, the reality of my family's indifference slapped me right in the face. I had been working hard to get into a good college. The scholarship applications, the research, the planning, everything was about securing a future outside of this house, away from this suffocating dynamic. When I got into the local college and earned a full scholarship for graphic design, I thought that maybe things were finally looking up. But as soon as I shared the news, the air in the house thickened with an uncomfortable tension. My dad's response was lukewarm at best. "That's great, Chloe," he said. But his voice lacked the enthusiasm it should have had for such a major accomplishment. Linda, on the other hand, smiled through clenched teeth. She made sure to point out how lucky I was to have a scholarship, and that Emma would be getting a proper education one day. That was all. No real excitement for me, no celebration of my hard work, just the looming reminder that I was lucky to get what I got. But Emma was the real star of the family. When I mentioned that I might need a car to get to college, my dad immediately shut me down. "We can't afford another car, Chloe," he said, cutting me off before I could finish. "The tuition alone is stretching us thin." I nodded, trying not to let the bitterness take over. I had a bus pass and I would make it work. But then, just a few days later, I overheard Linda talking about buying Emma a brand new car for her 16th birthday, a red Mercedes. I felt my heart sink. Emma, who didn't even need to worry about a thing, would get a luxury car, and I was stuck taking the bus to college. I had long learned to keep my emotions in check, to not show how much it hurt. But this was too much. The unfairness was suffocating. My life had become a series of compromises, where Emma's needs were always prioritized over mine, and my sacrifices were barely acknowledged. I didn't even have the luxury of having a conversation with my dad about my own future without feeling like I was stepping on Emma's toes. It was always about her, never about me. By the time I started college, I was already used to this. I had learned to live in the background, to keep my head down and my mouth shut. But it was exhausting. The constant feeling of being ignored, of being second best, was starting to break me down. I went to college, made the best of it, and tried to stay focused on my studies. But every time I came home, I could feel the coldness in the air. It wasn't just the house, it was my family. There was no place for me anymore. The tipping point came when I turned 21. I had been working hard for years, trying to prove that I deserved something, anything from my family. I had been following the rules, playing the role of the quiet, responsible daughter. But every time I thought things might change, I was reminded that nothing would ever change. Then one day, it happened. I got a call from Grandma and Grandpa. They had been my rock, the only ones who ever truly saw me, who knew who I really was and loved me for it. Grandma sounded worried. She said they needed to talk to me about something important. My heart sank as I drove to their house that afternoon, unsure of what I was walking into. They were the only family I had left, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing them too. When I arrived, I could see the exhaustion on Grandpa's face. He looked pale, but he was still sitting in his armchair, as always. Grandma sat beside him, her eyes filled with concern. After a few moments of silence, Grandma took a deep breath and told me that they had been thinking about the future. Grandpa had been struggling with his health, and they were planning to move to a nursing home, Pine Grove, a place that would take care of them as they aged. I tried not to cry, but the tears came anyway. I didn't want to lose them. I didn't want to let go of the only stable thing in my life, but that wasn't the end of it. After Grandpa and Grandma shared their plans, they told me something that would change everything. They had transferred ownership of their house to me. They had registered it in my name, legally and officially. I was shocked, speechless. They wanted to make sure I had a home, a place that was truly mine. "You're our granddaughter, Chloe," Grandma said softly. We want to make sure you're taken care of no matter what happens. I was overwhelmed. This house was everything to me. It was where I had spent so many childhood memories. The thought of it being mine, of having a space that was truly mine, felt like a dream. But I knew what this meant. It meant that my dad, Linda, and Emma would no longer have control over my life. I promised Grandpa and Grandma I wouldn't tell them. It was our secret for now. They wanted to protect me, to make sure I had a future that didn't revolve around Emma and Linda. But I had no idea that this simple act of love from my grandparents would set off a chain of events that would change everything. When graduation came, I was filled with a mix of excitement and dread. I had done it. I'd worked hard, maintained good grades, and somehow gotten through the nightmare that had been my family life. But as I prepared to step into the next chapter of my life, I was met with the same bitter reality. Nothing had truly changed. The more I succeeded, the more invisible I became. Emma was always at the center of everything, and I was always the afterthought. I had earned a place in a local graphic design program, which meant I could stay at home for college and save some money. My grandparents, ever the supportive figures in my life, were the ones who showed up for me when it mattered most. At my graduation party, they handed me a top-of-the-line laptop as a gift, something I'd always dreamed of owning for my studies. They told me I'd need it for my design work, and their pride was evident as they hugged me tight. This was the kind of support I had been craving for years. Genuine, unconditional love. I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe things were finally looking up, but as I mentioned before, life in my house, now more than ever, revolved around Emma. The day after graduation, I approached my dad with a question. I asked him if I could use his old car to get to school. I didn't want to burden him with buying me a new one. I was simply hoping he would let me borrow his. The answer was no, and the reason was predictable. We couldn't afford it. The car payments for my education were already too high. I tried to keep my disappointment to myself, swallowing the bitter reality. But what I overheard the next day left me reeling. Linda and Dad were discussing Emma's upcoming 16th birthday and how they planned to buy her a brand new luxury red Mercedes. I couldn't believe my ears. There they were, discussing the purchase of a car for Emma while I was stuck with my bus pass. I was paying for my education with the money Mom had set aside for me, the money she had worked so hard to save, and yet Emma, who didn't even need it, was about to get a car worth more than I could ever imagine. That night, as I sat in my room with my bus pass still clutched in my hand, I felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal. My entire life had been spent watching my dad and Linda pour their attention, affection, and resources into Emma, while I was left to fend for myself. I had never asked for luxury or privilege, but it was hard to ignore the stark contrast between the way I was treated and the way Emma was. 2 years into college, things hadn't gotten any better. I had adapted to my life at home, long bus rides, minimal acknowledgement from my parents, and had even grown used to the uncomfortable dynamic. My grades were still excellent, but my life outside of school felt stagnant. I wasn't part of the family. I was merely a resident, quietly existing in a house that didn't feel like home anymore. Then one Saturday, I received a call from my grandmother. Her voice was strained as she asked me to visit them. Grandpa had suffered a heart attack, and they needed to talk to me about something important. I immediately dropped everything and went to see them, my heart heavy with the knowledge that something was wrong. When I arrived, I found my grandparents sitting together, looking older than I remembered, and their faces were serious. Grandma took a deep breath and told me the truth. Grandpa's health was declining, and they had decided to move into Pine Grove, a local nursing home that would provide them with the care they needed. But it wasn't just their health that had them worried. Grandpa took my hands in his and said, "Chloe, there's something you need to know. The house is yours now. We've made sure it's all legally transferred to you." My mind raced as I tried to process what they were saying. The house I had spent so many weekends in, the house where I had felt safe and loved, was now mine. They had planned ahead, knowing that my future with Dad and Linda was uncertain, and they wanted to make sure I was taken care of. I couldn't believe it. "But, Dad?" I asked, my voice trembling. Grandma gave me a soft smile and said, "This is your home now, Chloe. We've registered the house in your name. Your dad doesn't know. We want you to have something that's truly yours." It was all too much to take in. How had they seen through everything? How had they known that the family I thought I had wasn't truly mine? At that moment, I promised them I wouldn't tell Dad. I wouldn't say anything until it was absolutely necessary. Grandpa nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. Good girl, he said. It's nobody's business but ours. 2 weeks later, after they had moved into Pine Grove, Dad and Linda showed up to pick up the keys to the house. Linda's voice rang through the air as she practically gushed about how wonderful it would be to finally live in this house. She started talking about renovations and new furniture, and I could feel my heart sink. This house, which meant everything to me, was going to be turned into something else, something that no longer resembled the family home it once was. Emma was already imagining what the house would look like when she got to make it her own. And that's when things went from bad to worse. Linda casually announced that Emma and I would be sharing a room. I couldn't believe my ears. At 16, I was being asked to share a room with a 14-year-old who had become increasingly entitled and manipulative over the years. Emma immediately protested, throwing a tantrum that only grew worse the more she was told no. I watched in silence as she stomped around the house, demanding the master bedroom. And then, just as I had predicted, she got what she wanted. I had been pushed aside so many times before, but this time was different. I had enough. And when I opened the door to our shared room later that day, the sight that greeted me took my breath away. My laptop, my beautiful graduation gift, was shattered. Its screen cracked beyond repair, the case bent and broken. Emma sat there on the bed, an innocent smirk playing on her lips as she looked up at me. What did you do? My voice cracked as I whispered the words. Emma's response was chilling. She had done it on purpose, and there was nothing I could do about it. The years of being ignored, the endless manipulation by Emma, all came crashing down on me at that moment. Something inside me snapped. It was the week before my graduation, and everything was supposed to be falling into place. I had a plan. After years of struggles and silently shouldering the weight of a family that didn't see me, I was finally going to be able to move forward. I'd been accepted to the local college's graphic design program, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had something to look forward to. My grandparents had been my biggest supporters, always reminding me that I could do anything, and they had surprised me at my graduation with a top-of-the-line laptop. It felt like a small victory, a recognition that I wasn't invisible anymore. But even as I held that shiny new laptop, the excitement quickly dulled with the realization of how things were at home. My father's reaction to my graduation was lukewarm at best. It wasn't that he was cruel. It's just that I had stopped being his priority years ago. He was too busy with Linda, and Emma was his new golden child. When I asked Dad if I could borrow his old Honda to get to college, his response was predictable. We just can't afford another car right now, Chloe. You'll need to take the bus. And that's when I overheard the conversation between Linda and Dad about Emma's sweet 16. It hit me like a cold slap to the face. Linda was planning to buy Emma a luxury car, the kind that I could only dream of, all while I was stuck with bus rides and waiting for a life that seemed to never come. We'll make sure Emma has the best, Linda had said with her ever-present air of superiority. She deserves it. I felt a pit in my stomach. She deserved it? Emma hadn't even earned it. It wasn't fair, but somehow I had learned to accept it. It was just how things were. 2 years of college came and went, and I tried to make the best of everything. I kept my head down, went to class, took the bus, and tried to keep my distance from home as much as I could. My relationship with Emma grew worse, and I began to brace myself for the inevitable. I kept telling myself that one day it would be over. One day I'd be out on my own, away from all of them. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my dad, Linda, and Emma had no intention of letting me go. Then came the phone call from Grandma. Chloe, she said, her voice strained. Can you come visit us this weekend? Your grandfather's had a bit of trouble with his heart, and we need to talk to you about something important. My heart sank. I was scared. I knew that Grandpa had been in poor health for some time, but this was different. Something told me that this was going to be life-changing. When I arrived, my grandparents were sitting in their living room, and I could see the fatigue in their faces. Grandpa looked pale, but he was sitting up in his armchair, trying to put on a brave face. Grandma was beside him, her hands gently holding his, as they exchanged a look that told me they had something difficult to say. Chloe, dear, Grandma began, we need to tell you something. After your grandfather's heart attack, we've done a lot of thinking about the future. We're getting old, sweetheart. and maintaining this house is becoming too much for us." My heart clenched as I tried to fight back tears. I didn't want to hear this. They were my rock, and the thought of losing them, of losing this house, was too much. But then Grandpa spoke, and his voice was steady, though tinged with sadness. "We've decided to move to Pine Grove Nursing Home," he said. "We'll be well taken care of there. It's the best place for us. You can visit anytime you want, Chloe, but we'll be fine." Grandma pulled me into a hug that smelled of lavender perfume, so familiar and soothing. "I'll come every weekend," I promised, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I'll always be here." But the news didn't end there. Grandpa looked at me seriously, his eyes full of love and concern. "Chloe, we've made arrangements for the house. It's been registered in your name. This house belongs to you now. It's all legal and official." My mind spun. Was this a joke? Did Dad know? Was this real? I couldn't contain my shock. "Does Dad know about this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Grandma's face softened. "It's none of his business. This house was always ours to give, and we chose to give it to you." The weight of their words sank in slowly. They had done this for me, to make sure I was taken care of, to make sure I had a future. The house was mine. My stomach twisted with a mix of emotions. Love, anger, confusion. I had so many questions, but in that moment, I understood. They knew. They knew how things had been with my father and how I had been treated. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of helping Grandma and Grandpa move to Pine Grove and trying to keep it together while everything changed. Dad had no idea what was coming. When we handed him the keys to their house, he was ecstatic. "This is wonderful," Linda gushed. "No more rent. We'll have our own family home." But as they started moving in, I could feel my heart sinking. Linda's plans for the house didn't involve me. She was already planning to redecorate, to make it theirs, to transform it into a perfect home for their real family. I was just an afterthought. Then came the moment that changed everything. Linda announced, "The girls can share the blue room upstairs." "It's the only room that's habitable?" I felt my whole world tilt. Sharing a room with Emma? The same Emma who had tormented me for years. No, this wasn't fair. But what could I do? I was trapped in a house that no longer felt like home. I had no choice but to agree. But as I moved my belongings into that room, I could feel the tension in the air. It was just a matter of time before something broke. And when I returned that evening, after another long day of classes, everything changed. My laptop, the graduation gift from Grandma and Grandpa, was lying shattered on the floor. Emma had done it. She had broken it. And she wasn't even sorry. I stood there, frozen for what felt like an eternity, staring at the remnants of my graduation gift. My beautiful laptop, the one I had been so excited to use for my graphic design studies, was now a broken heap on the floor. The screen was cracked, the case bent beyond recognition. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to process what had happened. Emma sat on her bed, a satisfied smirk playing across her face. She knew what she had done, and she was enjoying it. My chest tightened. The familiar sting of years of being overlooked, ignored, and belittled surged up inside me. Every feeling of resentment, every moment I had been dismissed as the difficult one, came rushing to the surface. "What did you do?" My voice cracked as I whispered the words. Then the anger built. "What did you do?" I shouted. The volume of my voice felt like it wasn't even mine anymore, like it was the voice of someone who had been suffocated for years. "Oops," Emma said casually, not even looking up from her nails as she examined them, perfectly manicured. "Accidents happen, but go ahead. Try telling them. We both know who they'll believe." Her words were cold, calculated. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a sinister whisper. "I did it on purpose, and there's nothing you can do about it." That was it. Something inside me snapped. All the years of frustration, of quietly trying to fit into a family that never accepted me, came crashing down. I could feel the anger boiling over, hot and uncontrollable. I lunged at Emma without thinking, my hands grabbing her shoulders in a tight grip, shaking her in the fury that had been building up for years. "You spoiled, entitled little brat!" I screamed. The words were raw, so unlike anything I had ever said to her before. The rage was like a tidal wave, drowning out all other thoughts. Emma's shrill scream was genuine this time. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't looking for attention. She was genuinely shocked. But that only made me angrier. How dare she play the victim now after everything she'd done to me over the years? Help! She's crazy! Emma cried out, the sound desperate. I could hear Linda's frantic footsteps outside the door, her voice rising in panic as she called for Dad. But nothing mattered anymore. I didn't care. I was finally standing up for myself after all these years, finally letting it all out. Dad burst into the room, pulling me off Emma with force, his hands gripping my arms tightly as he shoved me away from her. Linda was already rushing to Emma's side, cradling her like she was the victim. Emma's face was now streaked with fake tears, clutching her mother as though she were the one who had been attacked. Look, I pointed at my shattered laptop, my chest heaving with each breath. My voice was breaking. Look what she did. Grandma and Grandpa's graduation gift. She destroyed it on purpose. She admitted it. Emma's expression shifted in an instant. The smirk that had been on her face was gone. Now, her eyes widened in panic as she clung to Linda, suddenly changing her story. It was an accident. I just bumped into the desk. I didn't mean to do it. Emma's voice trembled as she sobbed in Linda's arms. And then Chloe attacked me. She's crazy. She attacked me for no reason. You evil, horrible girl. Linda shrieked at me. The venom in her voice felt like a knife to my chest. How dare you attack my daughter? How dare you? I felt my heart break all over again. This was what it had come to. No one was listening. No one cared. I was just the troublemaker, the burden. Dad stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Stop it, Chloe. I've had enough. Go to your room, he barked. Why? I whispered, my voice raw. Why do you always choose them? What happened to the dad who used to love me? Who promised Mom he'd take care of me? I was desperate now, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he'd see how wrong everything was. His face reddened with rage. Don't you dare bring your mother into this, he bellowed. You want to know the truth? You've been nothing but a burden since she died. A constant reminder of a past I want to forget. Linda and Emma are my real family now. You're just excess baggage we've been carrying around. You have 1 hour to leave my house. His words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered back, my hands shaking. The man I had spent my whole life trying to please, the man who had promised my mom he'd take care of me, was now telling me I wasn't wanted. I stared at him, 1,000 emotions swirling inside me. Anger, hurt, disbelief. And then, Emma's voice, smug and victorious, broke through it all. I can finally have this room all to myself, she chirped. I'm thinking pink walls and maybe a crystal chandelier. Maybe we can make it all pretty, like the rest of the house. I couldn't take it anymore. Something inside me shifted. The quiet, compliant version of me, the one who had endured years of neglect and mistreatment, was gone. I was done. Actually, I said, my voice steady and clear, this isn't your house to renovate. Linda and Dad stopped in their tracks, turning to face me with confusion written across their faces. What are you talking about? Linda asked, her tone sharp. I reached into my purse and pulled out the property documents that Grandpa had given me. This house belongs to me now, I said firmly. Grandma and Grandpa transferred ownership to me before they moved to Pine Grove. If anyone's leaving, it's you three. The room fell silent. For the first time in my life, I had control. My father, the man who had never defended me, now stood there, pale and shaking as he read the papers. Linda's smug expression melted away as she realized the truth. This can't be legal, Linda stammered. Her voice was weak. Dad dialed Grandpa's number, the tension so thick I could feel it in the air. Dad, he said, his voice trembling. What is this? Grandpa's voice came through the speaker, calm and measured. I see Chloe's finally told you about the house. Dad's face turned red with frustration as Grandpa continued. How could you do this to Chloe? How could you treat her like this for all these years? It wasn't a question but a statement, and it felt like a slap in the face. Grandpa didn't back down. Choose your next words very carefully, Grandpa warned. One more disrespectful word, and you and your precious Emma lose your inheritance too. The silence in the room was deafening. I stood there, watching as Dad, Linda, and Emma processed everything. I could see the panic setting in as they realized they had no power anymore. Linda turned to me, desperation in her voice. Chloe, sweetie, we didn't mean any of this. We were just upset. You know how we get, right? We're family. But I wasn't buying it anymore. No, I replied firmly. You're not family. Not anymore. I left the room, the weight of everything I had endured finally sinking in, the years of mistreatment, the neglect, the manipulation, all of it had built up to this moment, and I wasn't going to let them take it from me. The next week, I changed the locks. The days following that conversation with Grandpa and Grandma were a blur of emotions, shock, relief, and a deep sense of unease. I knew the moment I told Dad about the house that everything would change, but I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. I had to stand up for myself, even if it meant tearing down everything I had believed about my family. When I finally sat down with my dad to talk about it, his reaction was not what I expected. His face went pale as he listened to me explain what Grandma and Grandpa had done. I could see the confusion in his eyes at first, followed by a flicker of something else: anger, resentment, maybe even a touch of guilt. He stood up abruptly, shaking his head. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "How could they do this? This was supposed to be our house, our family home, but it wasn't. Not anymore. It was mine." The words had barely left my lips before the tension in the room became suffocating. Linda walked in just then, her expression a mixture of surprise and disbelief. I could see her calculating, processing the implications of what I had just revealed. She took a deep breath, looking at Dad for support, but the silence between them spoke volumes. "Chloe," she began, her voice sugary sweet, "I understand you're upset, but this is a family matter. We need to work through this together. I'm sure there's a way we can make this work." But there was no making it work anymore. I had seen enough over the years to know what working together meant in this family. It meant me sacrificing my happiness for Emma, for Linda. I had spent too long being invisible, being the one who always gave way to their needs, their plans. No more. "Actually, Linda," I said firmly, "this house belongs to me now. Grandma and Grandpa gave it to me, and that's final. If anyone's leaving, it's you three." Linda's face twisted in anger. "You ungrateful little—" Before she could finish, I held up my hand, cutting her off. "You've made it clear how you feel about me, and I'm done letting you walk all over me." Dad didn't say anything. He just stood there staring at the floor, his face red with frustration. It was clear that he didn't know what to do, how to fix the mess that had been created. But at that moment, I didn't care about his discomfort. I didn't care about his guilt or Linda's manipulation. I cared about my future. I cared about finding my place in the world where I could finally breathe. "Get your things and leave," I told them. "I've had enough." I walked out of the room, my heart racing, but for the first time in years, I felt empowered. The next few days were filled with the practicalities of change. I contacted a lawyer to make sure everything was in order with the house, and I made arrangements for them to move out. When moving day came, I couldn't bring myself to watch them go. But I wasn't sad. Not in the way I thought I would be. Instead, I was relieved. Finally, after all these years, I was free. The following weeks felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was living in the house that had always been mine, surrounded by the memories of my grandparents and my mom. I started rearranging things, repainting the walls, making it truly my space. For the first time, I could breathe. I didn't hear from Dad for a while after that. Linda sent me a few angry texts, but I ignored them. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going back. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about protecting myself. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when they treated me like I didn't matter. A few months later, I received a message from Dad. He apologized, said he was sorry for everything, and that he missed me. I didn't respond right away. I needed time. I needed space. But eventually I called him. We talked for the first time in months. And as much as I wanted to blame him for everything, I couldn't. The hurt was still there, but I realized that it wasn't my responsibility to fix everything. That was something only he could do. I don't know where things will go from here. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive them completely. But I do know this. I've learned that sometimes you have to take control of your own life, even if it means letting go of people you thought would always be there. I've built something for myself, and that's all that matters now. I'm not a burden. I'm not second place. I'm Chloe, and I'm worthy of love and respect. And in the end, that's all I need.